Kevin, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Well, we've been putting this off for a long, long time, and I kept saying I don't have time to do your podcast, Mark, because I'm traveling all the time. Well, you caught me now. I don't have an excuse to do it. I'm stuck here at home, and so I might as well do my social long distancing here interaction. And we've wanted to do this for a long time, and you and I've known each other for, I don't even want to think, since you had hair,
Yeah.
since I had hair.
We both had hair.
But we've just kind of been on parallel paths and known each other for a long time. So I'm very pleased to be talking to your listeners.
Thank you. Well, I mean, neither one of us is traveling right now, so but we're both still writing, and I want to talk a little bit about the way that you write, because I think the dictation is something that's sort of part of the Kevin J. Anderson brand.
Mm-hmm.
And has that changed at all now that you're more homebound?
Well, that's what I live in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains, and so we've got beautiful scenery and lots and lots of bike paths and hiking trails and everything all over the place. And I'll just kind of back up and give a little bit of a basis. For most of my career, which is, I mean, we're talking 3.5 decades. I was always a dictator, that I would go out. I think better when I'm walking. I think better when I'm out in nature and I'm seeing things like mountains and waterfalls and trees and all that sensory input that's going around. So I would like to just walk and I dictate. And I've been doing this since I had a micro cassette recorder. Now, of course, I've got a digital recorder. And that's just, it's the way I think better. It's the way my imagination rolls. And over the years, I have trained myself on how to I have my notes. I know what my chapters are going to be. I outline heavily ahead of time. And then I'll just go out for a walk and I'll have my notes and I will dive into the story, and I'll be walking along in the Great Sand Dunes National Park here in Colorado. And I'll be dictating stories about Paul Atreides riding a sandworm on the planet Dune. I mean, that it just seems like an appropriate place to do it. So I've done this for a very, very long time, and that's my preferred way. Especially now that the weather's getting better, I've got a huge epic fantasy that I just started writing a week and a half ago. And I'll go out and I'll dictate. Of course, now we're all supposed to not interact with other people. You're supposed to stay home wherever you can. But one of the things that they do allow is for you to go outside and walk and exercise. There are bike paths. There are people walking their dogs. Because I've been here long enough, I know a lot of kind of hard or isolated hiking trails where nobody ever goes. And so I can still do my writing the same way that I always did. I'll go out and again, I'll probably do 2 chapters a day, which is something like 4,000 words, 4,500 words.
Okay.
And I go and I start dictating and I get into the zone and into that story and dictate it and come back and I upload my files to the typing service that I use. And usually in a day or so, they send back the transcription of it.
Cool. So this is something you do for first draft then, right?
Yeah, well, it's again, I've been training myself to do it for so long that it's not super sloppy. I mean, you can still listen to it and my first draft now is better than my final drafts were when I was starting out. But it is a learned skill. You have to understand how to do it. You have to not be self-conscious. You have to, learn how to think in complete sentences and stuff. And so that's how I've developed it. But when I advocate other writers doing this, the thing I keep hearing so much is, I tried it for 30 seconds and I just couldn't do it. Well, the first time you sat down at a computer keyboard, you typed for 30 seconds, so you didn't give up on typing. It makes no sense. The keyboard I'm looking at right now, the arrangement of when they invented the typewriter, the keyboard, they arranged the keys so that it would slow down the typist so that the keys wouldn't get tangled up when they were typing. So typing is a very common learned skill that all of your audience, I'm sure, knows how to use a keyboard. Well, dictating is also a learned skill. It's not something that you can do it right the first time. You have to build into it. So one of the things that I kind of advocate is that use it for yourself, for like taking notes, for doing character development, maybe world building. When I'm at the start of a project, say I've got the book I'm writing now is the third book in this giant epic fantasy trilogy that started out with Spine of the Dragon last summer. It's kind of like Game of Thrones, 50 different storylines, giant epic continents at war and clashing with each other and stuff. Unlike Game of Thrones, I'm actually on the final book right now and I'm finishing it. But when I was just starting it, I had the concept for the storyline and I knew what some of the characters were, but I would just go out, do like a 5-mile hike in the mountains, and I just go, well, what about this? And what if this happens? And what if the dragon fights the god that just got resurrected from the temple? And what if this person's actually a spy and a shapeshifter? And it's sort of a way of brainstorming with yourself, but preserving the ideas that you have. And when you're walking and just thinking of things, you probably got a million really good ideas that you forget by the time you come back home and write them down.
Right.
And so this way, it's sort of like an instant notepad that you can take it on. So when you're walking, you just capture your ideas like that. Or another thing I like to do for character development, say I'm looking at King Aiden as one of my characters.
Right.
So who is this guy and what is his personality like and what is his background? And I'll just like, almost like an actor trying to get into the mindset of a character he's acting. I'll do that as a writer. I'll just go walking down the bike path and I go, all right, today we're King Aiden. And I start rattling off and I'll make up maybe some seminal incident in his childhood that he lost a pet and that changed his attitude toward dogs, something like that.
Right.
But I'll just go and I'll just kind of make up the character's biography. No, I'm never going to put a giant biography inside the novel that I'm writing. I might take snippets and flashbacks and anecdotes, but just by focusing down and saying, all right, I'm putting on the King Aiden hat right now, and I'm just going to get into this character and tell his life story, that really helps me. The fact that I don't have to be diligently writing down everything that I think of really frees me up to just come up with ideas as fast as I can. And so I advocate, if you're going to use and you don't even have to buy an expensive digital recorder. I mean, I've got, this is my, it's an Olympus DS 9000, 9300, something like that. These are high end. This is like a professional use. I think they're $500 or so. I'm not even sure exactly what it was. It does like 7,000 functions and 6999 of them that I don't really need, but even so, that's a high-end thing. If you're just doing notes though, I mean, your smartphone probably has a recording function on it. Right. You can get these little memo digital recorders that have maybe a half an hour recording life in them or something like that. You can buy those for $20 or something like that. Right. I like getting outside. I like exercising. There's been all kinds of studies that say that your creativity and imagination works better when you're moving, when you're not just sitting and staring at your screen. If you're actually out walking or doing something, and it keeps you healthy too. And I would rather stay in shape than not be in shape. So
that never hurts, right? So
well, and so if I can go off to Rocky Mountain National Park and hike on these beautiful trails and go by waterfalls and go, this is my office today. How cool is that?
That is very, very cool. Now, the other thing is you are very prolific. You have continued to publish multiple books with traditional publishers, but you also do stuff through your own imprint, Wordfire Press. Mm-hmm. And so you're completely hybrid in your approach, right?
Right.
How do you keep track of all those different projects that you're working on?
I have a wife.
Okay. She's really, really organized.
Well, Rebecca Vesta, she's also a best-selling author, but she's my co-publisher and she does all of the paperwork and the royalties. And we have, I have a associate publisher, my assistant Marie Whitaker, who does all kinds of extra stuff, and Michelle Corsillo is our production manager, and she handles. So there's a lot of the busy work of being a publisher, but
right.
I don't know. I've always worked on multiple projects. I'm kind of like that ADHD kid with the channel changer on the TV, just changing all over the place. But I like that's one of the reasons why I am so prolific, though, because every book that you're writing has got maybe 10 or 11 stages to it, from the researching whatever, sailing ships or the crusades or whatever you need to research, which is, I mean, that's book learning. That's you sitting there in the library, you're googling things and you're just absorbing information. That's researching. And
Right.
then there comes the character development and world building and the plotting and outlining, which to me, that's the most fun of all of it. And then you write the first draft, and then you do the editing. And writing the first draft to me is a lot of fun. Editing the first draft is like going to the dentist. I hate it. And then you edit it 4, 5, 6 times until it gets really smooth enough, and then you either send it to your own proofing team, or you send it to the traditional publisher, and then it comes back with copy edits, and then you have to proofread it. And um, all of these stages, some of them are fun and some of them are not. And so if I was just working on one project, a year-long book, and all I worked on was that one book, then I'd have times when it's like 3 weeks of a lot of fun, and then 3 weeks of like final exams. And then, so the point is, if I'm working on several different projects at once, I can do a real boring part for a couple of hours, like proofreading something on one book, and then I can do world building in a different book, so that I can um, do some fun stuff. And then once I put in a bunch of that, then I can face maybe doing the edit on something else. And um, I think that kind of cures any possibility of writer's block, because if I get stuck on something, then I just go, all right, I'll leave that on the back burner for a little while, and then I'll switch to a different project that I can go full steam ahead on. And then when I'm ready, I can go back to the thing I was stuck on and pick it up again.
That's fantastic. I love that. It's like you can have dessert with every meal. Like, I mean, all the time
Hmm.
in the midst of, that's fantastic.
Well, it's all like the sampler platter, or
Yeah,
what do you call it, the palate cleanser in between your courses. And
that's
I
true.
know, we're getting too hoity-toity here. We all just eat
Well,
hamburgers and
I thought you were going to go to a flight of beer because you and I bonded over two important things in our lives: craft beer, our love of craft beer, and our love of Rush. I think I
Mhm.
remember the first time we met. That was
Definitely.
the thing that got us together. But Rush has played a significant role from the beginning of your career as a writer to a really cool project. So how can we rush people through this sort of progression of Kevin J. Anderson's, from first novel to this new project that I want to hear more about.
Well, and even, I mean, they're all really cool projects. I mean, everything that
They're
I've
all cool, yes.
but my very, very first novel, back when I was 25 years old and I was just writing it, it's called Resurrection Inc. And it's currently published by ECW Press, which is a beautiful Canadian publisher. Um, my first novel, I'm writing this science fiction novel, kind of a dystopian, far future science fiction murder mystery thing. And Rush came out with their album called Grace Under Pressure. And as I'm listening to all the songs on Grace Under Pressure, now I had been a Rush fan before this, but as I'm listening to Grace Under Pressure, all of these songs, it was like, hey, that's the soundtrack for this character, or that's the soundtrack for this scene, or the last song on the album is called Beneath the Wheels. And that song is the grand finale climactic scene in my novel. And so as I was writing it, I just went, I'm just going to use this. And I kind of Easter egged a bunch of little lyrical phrases throughout my novel, and just made sure that every song on the album had a chapter and a corresponding scene in the book. Now, I knew it. I didn't think anybody else was going to know it. And the book got published by Signet Books. It was this science fiction mass market uh, mid-list paperback with this horrible cover with a stone skull and a rocket ship on it. But I put in the acknowledgments that it was inspired by the Rush album, Grace Under Pressure, and I specifically acknowledged Geddy Lee, the vocalist, Alex Lifeson, the guitarist, and Neil Peart, the drummer and lyricist, the guy who wrote all those songs. And when the book was published, I somehow got a mailing address for the Rush management company, and I mailed signed copies off. And I asked if the managers would please pass the book along to Neil. And about a year later, I got a three and a half page single spaced letter back in my mailbox that he had read the book and he loved it, and kind of wrote me a fan letter, and he invited me to keep writing him if I wanted to, like, if you should desire to correspond. And I'm like, this guy's my idol, of course I'd like to correspond. And so we corresponded for 30, I think we knew each other for 31 or 32 years. Along the way, as we were corresponding, Neil did, every year he would take like this trip to the wilds of Africa, and he would bicycle around like these dirt roads and isolated villages. And I mean, this is just amazing to even think about it. This huge rock star all by himself bicycling through like unknown territory in Africa. And he would send me these letters just filled with descriptions of the landscape and the people he met in these villages and this weird thing that had happened to him, and places he saw. And we kind of connected all of his description scenes into this dark fantasy Twilight Zone-ish story called Drum Beats, about a rock drummer bicycling through Africa who finds this very strange village where they make very creepy drums covered with human skin, and they've got special powers. And so we wrote that story and we published it in an anthology, and it's been reprinted several times, and it's still up as an ebook story. But we had always wanted to do like a real fancy edition, because a lot of people just wanted to have a hard copy of just the story. Yeah. But we talked about it a lot, and how are we going to find an artist to do everything? And it was just one of those projects that we never got around to. And unfortunately, Neil passed away in January, so we never did finish it. But when you have a good friend die like that, all this stuff comes up and you go, damn it, I really shouldn't have waited so long. I need to get this done. And so I kind of started putting it together. I was going to just dig through stock art services and find a bunch of appropriate artwork. And I was going to put it together with my own publishing house and make a really nice illustrated edition of it, so that I would sign, and we'd have a limited number. And just as I put out that I was doing this on Facebook, a brilliant painter and artist, a Canadian painter named Steve Otis. He does a lot of wildlife stuff and a lot of dark horror illustrations. He's a huge Rush fan, and he contacted me to ask if I needed anybody to do a cover painting or some interior stuff. And I sent him the story, and we corresponded, and he just went just head over heels. He was great. He started painting these just jaw-dropping. The cover is amazing. The back cover is amazing. He's got, I think, 5 interior illustrations in it. And then I went and dug through all of my correspondence and found a bunch of photos of me and Neil, and he had sent me pictures of him when he was by his bicycle in these African things. And so we just put together, I wrote an original introduction to it with kind of chronicling the whole story. Right. And Neil had already written an afterword that we'd put up with the ebook. He'd written this whole extensive thing about how the story came about, and quoting from a bunch of my letters and kind of our relationship. So we already had that. And then we put it together in this full, beautiful, numbered, signed edition. I always sign them all. The artist, Steve Otis, has signed 800 special signature cards. Because he's in Canada, and it's really expensive to ship 800 books back and forth to Canada. So
certainly is.
So I'm going to be signing all of them, and he signed all of the cards. And right now, here's the plug. It's Wordfire is my company, Wordfire Press. So the website is Wordfire Shop, wordfireshop.com, and you can pre-order it. There are only 800 of them. We've sold 550, 600 of them so far. So it's going to be out in a month or something like that. But there's still a few copies left. But once it's done, we'll do a commercial release in 6 months or something like that.
That's fantastic.
But this is like a project really close to my heart, and it not just ties the story we wrote, which I think is really right. Creepy and really cool. In fact, you've reprinted it once or twice, I think. Yeah. But also it's something that's closely connected to me with my friendship with Neil. Right. But it's my own press. And so I had all the control. We got to put together the book the way I wanted it to look. It wasn't sent off to some other publisher. This is, you know, full on my baby, and I'm very happy with it. And the cover looks great. The interiors look great. I just got from the printer today the color proofs, so I have to look through
Oh.
those and make sure everything's, you know, big sheets of paper with registration colors all over them. And but this is, I want to shift a little bit because this is new for me, because as an indie publisher, we just use print on demand stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
all of my work is all the Wordfire Press titles. They're all up on you know, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the different electronic vendors. We use something called Draft to Digital. You might have heard of it.
I've heard of them.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but the print books are always print on demand, either whether it's Amazon KDP printing or whether it's Ingram Spark, and they're just printed and you get it. But for the 800 copies, of course, I had to go to an actual printer. So that means
Right.
we had to get 800 copies printed up on an offset press, and there's going to be a truck that's going to drop all the boxes with 800 books here on my driveway at the end of the month, and we're going to open up all the boxes, and I'm going to open the front cover and autograph and number each one of these copies, and so that's a different thing from the I mean, it's a lot more inconvenient because now we have to do all the fulfillment and the mailing labels and all that. And this project, of course, was conceived before all of my employees were told they couldn't come into work anymore. So,
Oh, that's right.
so
Yeah.
now I got to figure out how to ship 800 copies
And it's
without
you and
having,
Rebecca,
you know,
basically.
it's me and
Yeah.
Rebecca. But the books will come end of April, first week in May, and I'm kind of hoping they might ease up a little bit for limited employees to come in for a short period of time. You know,
Fantastic.
I have faced many more severe problems if I have to spend a while putting mailing labels and postage tape on things. We'll do that.
Well, and that kind of leads to it, and I know you lost a dear friend recently, but you have gone through a lot in the last 12 plus months with a lot of things. So there's a lot of people right now who are feeling a lot of anxiety. There's going to be a grief, right? Right? Even if COVID-19 does not take away people that we love,
Mhm.
people are experiencing grief right now because it's a grief of the loss of being able to hang out with friends, or you know, you and I going out for a beer
Mhm.
together, or any of those things that
Well, you
just,
brought your own beer, so it
yeah. So I'm good now. But
yes.
so writing through grief, because I mean, you've been through a lot in the last little while, and I know that I know it wasn't an easy time, but you continued to write, you continued to produce. How do you manage the anxiety or those extraneous things when you need to get things done as a writer?
Well, you know, years and years ago, and because this is all connected with Neil, going back to Neil, a lot of your people might not know that Neil went through just an absolute avalanche of personal tragedies in, oh, and I'm terrible with numbers, in 1996, 98, something like that. I'm
Mid
not,
90s, yeah.
yeah,
Was it?
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
remember exactly what it, I think
yeah.
mid 90s, where his only daughter got killed in a car accident, and then not long after that, his wife died of cancer, and then he had to put the family dog down, and that kind of was enough for him. He sort of turned into a hermit. He hid in his cabin up in um,
Laurentian
back,
Mountains.
uh, up back. He hid, and then one day he got on his motorcycle because he's a big motorcycle rider, and he just got on the bike and left. He was gone for almost a year, just cruising across Canada, across the United States, all the way down to Mexico. And he called himself afterward, because he had cut all ties with everybody. He called himself afterward that he was the ghost writer, and he had kept a journal of everything. And he published a phenomenal book called Ghost Writer about his journey through grief, and it's called Travels on the Healing Road, I think is the subtitle. And his whole journey, you know, this was way back when I mean, I kept reading this just thinking, how does anybody survive this? How does anybody go through all this? And you know, I kind of looked up to him for all that he had been through. um, and then just this current, now Neil passed away after a long time with brain cancer. He was battling that for a long time, which was also a secret for most of the world. So So that was another secret that we had to keep. But in the same year, my son died suddenly. My dad died after a long period of liver cancer. We lost one of our cats. Neil died. And this was all before COVID. So I'm like struggling to get through all of that. And I did write through all of it just because to me it was a cathartic thing. I mean, doing the writing, getting the creativity out, describing the world and doing the adventures, part of it was an escape. But the other part of it was when you're the writer and you're doing fiction, your world gets to make sense. Even if bad things happen and tragedies happen and plot twists and everything else, you're still in control of what happens in your writing.
Right.
You're not in control with what happens of the somebody just went to the grocery store and got exposed to COVID and ended up in the emergency room and died. I mean that,
Right.
or I mean not even that tragic. And again, I'm a science fiction writer, a world builder. I've been hired as a speaker for a lot of like futurism conferences, and part of my job is to just like take an idea and run with it and figure out the consequences. What's going to happen with this and what's going to happen with that. I'll confess it's not so much of a grief in my part, but I have a genuine anxiety and dread for how society is going to change in the aftermath of this.
Right.
I'm we're both old enough to remember, and as you might not have thought of this for a long time, but do you remember the Tylenol poisoner
Oh my
back in I
God,
think the
yes.
70s?
Yeah, or
So
early
before,
80s.
I
Yeah.
don't remember when
Wow.
it, I mean it was a long time ago,
Yeah.
but before this time, all of your bottles of aspirin, all of your medicines,
Yes.
all of your everything in the grocery store was just open. They screwed the
Yeah.
tops on, and that
There's
was
no
it.
sealed thing on the
And
top.
yeah,
Yeah.
and what happened was this guy made, I think, cyanide pills, and he snuck into the grocery store, randomly picked a bottle of Tylenol, and put these poison pills into it, and
Yeah.
slipped it back on the shelf. And so people died. I mean, I don't know how many people died. I can't remember that. But when that happened, this was a seismic shock. Everybody's like, wait, you mean we have to like seal up our bottles and make sure that people just can't walk by
Right.
and drop things into them? It was just like a shock. We hadn't thought of that before. And it was an immediate, I mean, within months, an immediate thing that suddenly every package in your grocery store was sealed and plastic wrapped and shrink wrapped. And I mean, all of that happened because of one nutcase putting poison pills in a bottle of Tylenol.
Right.
And then 9/11 was a similar thing. Before 9/11, you could walk into the airport and meet your party as they walked off the plane.
Yeah.
You could drive up and leave your car parked running in front of the baggage claim area. You could do all sorts of things that right now we go, why didn't we think how dangerous this was? Well,
Yeah.
it just, you're running around oblivious. And so the long story short here is Rebecca and I were just watching Killing Eve last night. I don't know if you've watched, it's a great BBC show. And there's this scene, it's a hunter trying to find an assassin or a hitman, hit woman. And there's this scene where they're in, I think Berlin or something like that. And the good guy's chasing the killer through this crowd in this Berlin disco.
Right.
And it's a very tense scene because the killer turns around and she's going to go and kill him instead. But we were horrified watching this scene because it's all these bodies shoulder to shoulder and squirming and sweating. And we just went, ew, they're too close to each other. And I got to say, I'm just, and I'm a hugger. I like to come up and I greet people and they're great friends of mine. And there's just like this instinctive, oh, I guess we don't touch people anymore. And that's going to be kind of in our mindset long after they tell us we can go back out. And well, just how fast things have changed here. I mean, I always used to go to the grocery store like every other day. I'd pick up fresh stuff and I make it for dinner.
Yeah.
And over the past year, we made an active effort to like use up all that stuff in our freezer because it was just sitting there, and it was old stuff. And so our freezer was empty right at the time when nobody could buy food anymore.
Yeah.
And so we have turned around like, oh, well, I would make a big batch of something, and after a few days, we'd get tired of it and throw out the last couple of meals because it was just like getting old. And now we're like, oh, well, we better eat this. We don't want to waste food.
Right.
And this is like in weeks, our mindset has
Right.
changed.
And we have a bit more time probably to go through before things
Well,
resemble normal again.
but to get more to what our stuff is, I'm involved in Legendary has this huge major motion picture remake of Dune, Frank
Yes.
Herbert's Dune,
Yes.
and that is already scheduled for December 18th release. It'll be the big holiday release.
The movie is
Um,
made already, correct?
so the movie's done. It's
Okay.
all filmed,
Okay.
and there's a spin-off TV show that they're working on, and all that stuff's going. But nobody's filming anything now, so the TV show, I mean, they're not filming it, obviously.
Right.
A lot of that kind of thing is stalled. Think about on the week that COVID really hit the U.S. We're only talking like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
The very weekend, there was a new Vin Diesel movie out. There was some kind of a romantic comedy date movie thing,
Right.
and there was some biopic about a Christian folk singer or something. I can't remember. But
Right.
all three of those movies were the major releases, and suddenly all movie theaters were shut down. So those movies didn't just bomb; they never went anywhere.
Right.
They kind of got pulled, and suddenly you're seeing all these brand new movies going straight to your big screen TV at home, if you have one.
Mm-hmm.
So you can instantly buy whatever the new movie is. You pay, $20 or something like that, but $20 is cheaper than if you took
Yeah.
yourself and your
$40 in
date or
popcorn.
whatever,
Yeah.
and popcorn and everything
Yeah.
else. So you still do that. And what I'm worrying is that this may well be the death knell for movie theaters, because you
Right.
still maybe want to go see Dune in a movie theater, but do you really need to see the romantic comedy in a movie theater? Why not stay home, pay $20 and
Right.
schmooze on the couch with the cat on your lap and get your own beer from the refrigerator instead of, and so just think of how this is going to change with entertainment. And as we mentioned before, I still have traditionally published books. My paperback of Spine of the Dragon, the big first fantasy novel that I've got, was supposed to be a June paperback release from Tor Books.
Right.
They just bumped it to August because the print plants are shut down.
Right.
The people who print the books that go to the bookstores, of course, the bookstores are shut down too. So that's just not going to happen. Now, is that meaning the readers, I'm assuming people still want to read, are the readers now finally going to get over that energy barrier, and they go, all right, I'll just read it on my Kobo instead of buying the paper book. I've always wanted to have the paper book, but I can't get one now, so I'll finally just go and
Right.
do the audiobook, or finally just go and do the ebook. And from my experience, once you nudge people to finally doing the update or the changing the way you're doing things, most of them don't change back.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
Rebecca and I just were noticing we still get paper checks in the mail from like a short story sale or something like that. So we had some paperwork sitting there, some checks, and we would normally have our assistant she goes to the post office, she goes to the bank and deposits them. Well, she understandably didn't want to stand in line at the bank to deposit the paper checks. And so then Rebecca finally went, well, I understand there's a service where you can just take a picture of the check and deposit electronically.
Yeah.
I mean, we always knew there was that service. We just never had the incentive to actually learn how to do it because somebody was always going to the bank anyway.
Yeah.
Well, now that we know how to do it, and it's not hard,
No.
now that you know how to do it, I don't think we're ever going to go back to the bank anymore. We'll just
Right.
do it all, taking a picture, because why should I pay an assistant to stand in line at the bank?
Right. That makes sense.
So that will never change back to the way it was before.
That's true. And I think the other thing, and this is probably a great segue, the way you and I can segue things so brilliantly, is education, and a lot, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. Therefore, my son, 15 years old, is doing online learning now from high school.
Mhm.
But you have, because you went back a couple of years ago now, you're teaching at an institution, and the course that you teach is mostly virtual. So the
Right.
reset for you was relatively easy than it would be for another professor, right? Can you talk a
Well,
little bit
the
about
the
that?
reset, I run a grad program so you can get a master's degree in publishing.
Right.
It's for Western Colorado University and Western Colorado University in publishing, and um, it's a 1 year course where you have two physical residencies. You come to Colorado, you spend 2 weeks, you're in a classroom with me. We do projects, we do lectures and presentations, we have guest speakers and all that stuff. But then the whole fall semester is all online classes. The whole spring semester is all online classes. And then you come back for a final 2 weeks in the following summer to do your wrap up projects to get your degree or get your diploma in search. Well, because of COVID, we've already um, changed the summer in-person residency to just a virtual one.
Right.
So it will be Zoom classes and it will be online instruction. We've had to adapt to that. To give a little plug, I did this program from scratch. I created it. I don't think it's like anything else that's out there. I did the degree program that I think is useful to people. It is completely balanced. Half of it is traditional publishing. The other half is indie publishing. Um, the students, one of the things that they did for their group project is they created an anthology. They made up an anthology. They got the concept of it. They came up with Monsters, Movies, and Mayhem, which is sort of fantasy, science fiction, horror stories about movies and monsters. And thanks to Draft to Digital, we got some money to pay for all the stories. And the thing when you have professional rates to pay for stories means you get a lot of submissions. And so when the students wrote up their write up for their anthology and then they sent out for submissions, we got, I think, 435 submissions coming in. So the students had to read the slush pile. They had to go through and write rejection letters. They had to figure out which ones they wanted to have. They issued contracts. They paid for the stories. They worked with the authors to do copy edits. Then they did proofreading. We designed it all in vellum. They did cover designs. They wrote press releases, and the book was supposed to come out. Well, it is coming out in July, but it was supposed to come out as one of their in-person classes. We were going to have a book launch party. We were going to have printed copies. We were going to have guest authors there. We were going to have the local newspapers and stuff. Well, we can't do that now. We have to come up with another way. So we're brainstorming interesting things to do. The classes, the online classes that I'm giving, it's about copyright and contracts and printing. Physical, actual printing, offset printing presses and everything, and aggregator platforms and Amazon ads and keywords. And right now, this week, we had Dave Chesson from Publisher Rocket. We've got a whole thing about Publisher Rocket, and they all got a copy of Publisher Rocket that they're going to be using for keywords and everything for their book projects. And for their solo projects, they're all, each person found an out of print, like a public domain book, an old Jules Verne or Edgar Allan Poe or something like that. And their project is to get the texts, and they have to proofread it. They're laying it out themselves in vellum. They're designing their own covers. They got people to write forwards to them. They're doing the keywords. We're going to release them all in hardcover and trade paperback and ebook, and they'll be trying to send out review copies and see what. In fact, this week's lecture was all about bookstores and book selling, and it was full on about Barnes and Noble and Chapters and Amazon and everything else. But on Saturday evening, I was sitting there frantically rewriting an entire new section to the top of it because bookstores are closed. Print plants aren't printing the books and getting them out into the bookstores.
Yeah.
Ingram is the biggest book distributor that puts books into every place where you would buy physical books. I haven't heard this from Ingram, but Diamond, which is the equivalent, Diamond is the distributor of all comic books. Diamond shut down. They're not going to be distributing any comic books to any comic book store or
Right.
even by mail for like 2 months.
Yeah.
So just in one fell swoop, the
Wow.
entire comics retail industry is paused. Let's hope that it comes back. But the reason I'm mentioning this is I couldn't just put up my lecture on book selling that was written before the apocalypse
Walk
and
into your
all
local
this other stuff.
bookstore. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things for I mean, there's no textbooks because publishing is just such a changing and mutating
Yeah.
and rapidly thing. So their textbooks are that we have them listen to podcasts every week, and they read. The textbook they had to buy was a subscription to Publishers Weekly. So every
Right.
week they read Publishers Weekly, and then they discuss and comment on various articles on it. And so it's really an up-to-date degree program. Um, and we are open for applications. So I'm pushing this because we had a full cohort the first year. We've got a decent amount already. We've got a second professor that we've just brought on, Allison Laguera, who's a publisher of WMG books. But we would like to get more students, and obviously things are so uncertain right now. We don't even know how to plan anything. So,
Of course.
I guess that's one of the things that indie writers and publishers have learned faster than anybody else is you can't sit there and let the moss grow on your shoes. You are always having to get to be new. You're always having to be on top of things because it's a moving target.
Right.
Uh, Everything changes constantly. The ad philosophy that worked a year ago doesn't work anymore. You have to change
Right.
it. It's exhausting. I like the old days when I could just write a book and mail it somewhere and then write the next book.
I thought that was a long, long time ago.
That's not going to happen anymore.
Do we have time to talk about Superstars writing seminars? Because I think the fact that you and Rebecca were two of the founding members of creating that
Mm-hmm.
was in recognition of how much the industry is changing, right? And
Well,
you're 11 years now?
we've had 11, so next year will be 12.
12.
Um, so, so I guess that was 12 years ago. Rebecca and I got together with Brandon Sanderson, David Farland, and Eric Flint. We all came over to my house. They were here and they all stayed in the various guest bedrooms. And we had sort of like a private summit because when you get to a certain level of success, I mean, I've had 57 national or international bestseller novels, 23 million copies in print. Brandon Sanderson's a huge success. Eric Flint's got a huge success. David Farland's a huge success. And when you get to a certain level of success, there's nobody you can complain to anymore because if you start whining to your writers group, they all go, gee, I wish I had your problems. But also when you get to a certain level of success, your questions and the people that you can ask things are also limited. And we felt that we had a lot of information we could exchange with one another about, how do you make a successful book tour and what is a good book launch and how do you keep a newsletter list and this was 12 years ago. So this was, I hope most of your people know to keep a newsletter list and start building things like that. This was in MySpace days. I think it was just still beginnings of Facebook. So we were really brainstorming of, okay, we're successful now, but how do we take our career to the next level, or how do we keep it at this level? And so we brainstormed, did all kinds of stuff. We got tons of great information that we shared. And we also realized that there are a million writers conferences out there, but they all teach you writing. Scene setting and suspense and character building and all that kind of stuff, which is all useful, but there's a lot of that out there.
Yeah.
We couldn't find anything that taught you about copyrights and contracts and which clauses to look out for and how to plan long-term for your career and how to do your own marketing. And it just wasn't there. And so we formed what we called Superstars Writing Seminars so that we taught sort of the business side, the career planning side. Our first one was in Pasadena, California, and I think we had 65 people. The one we just wrapped up, we're in Colorado Springs every year now. And the one we just wrapped up, I think we had 250. And that's like a perfect level for us. It's really big, but it still has this like a family intimate atmosphere to it. And we're open for next year. We've got, I just got kind of a surprise email from Hugh Howey. He said, "Kevin, do you still want me to come to Superstars? I'll come next year as an instructor." So, so Hugh Howey's an instructor. We've got Jonathan Mayberry. We've got Jim Butcher. We've got me and Eric Flint and Rebecca Mesta and David Farland, Jody Lynn Nye. We have we've had people from Audible. We've had people from HarperCollins, people from Tor and Macmillan and Bain Books and Simon and Schuster. And I mean, I'm blanking on all the stuff that we've had,
But a
we cover,
well-balanced approach, right? You've got indie people and you have traditional publishing.
right. We try to get both of them because I mean, I'm a diehard hybrid. There are some projects that I would like to get out with the major publisher. There are some projects like over the course of the years, I've written and published like 150 short stories. And it for the longest time, I thought, I really should collect these so that people can read them. And it rapidly became clear that I wasn't going to fit them into one volume because there's 150 stories. And so I ended up, I did 2 volumes of science fiction short stories, 1 volume of fantasy, and 1 volume of horror and dark fantasy. And I wrote a little introduction for every one of them. And the hardest part was just tracking down all the copyright information of where they were first published and all the, the fine print details. I mean, that was the real hard part. But I designed them myself. I did the book covers myself I have a designer, but I found the art and did what I wanted. And we released them all in 4 hardcover volumes. We have trade paperbacks. They're all in ebooks. They're all in audio. And we did them all ourselves because I can't remember. I'm a best-selling author. And I can't imagine going to my editor at Tor Books or my editor at HarperCollins and say, "Guess what? I want to give you a 4-volume hardcover collection of reprint short stories." I can hear the resounding couple of claps here in the background. But that's a collection that I'm really proud of. And it's stuff that I like to show off. And the cool thing is that by having all of my short stories in these 4 volumes, now my Hollywood manager has all of my short fiction in 4 volumes. And short stories are prime candidates for, an episode of a anthology TV series or even short films and everything. I mean, the film Arrival was a short story. I'm just using that as an example of that's the kind of project that I'd want to do by myself.
Right.
Whereas Spine of the Dragon is the kind of project that I want to have Tor Books publishing it. And so circling around, Superstars covers all of that kind of stuff. We have a very strong support network. And we are open for next year. It'll be February, I think the 2nd week of February in Colorado Springs.
Awesome.
Superstarswriting.com.
Excellent. And speaking of that, always inspiring, always fun to chat with you. Let my listeners please know where they can find out more about Kevin J. Anderson.
Okay. Well, it's my initials, the word the, and then KJA, the KJA on Twitter. You just look up I'm on Facebook, and I've got an official fan page, and I'll let you in. My website is wordfire.com. And as I mentioned before, Wordfire Shop is where you can pre-order drum beats. Wordfirepress.com is all of our publishing house. And I think we got 300 and some titles now that we've released. And they're all interconnected, and it's all kind of fun stuff. And again, Western Colorado University and publishing is type in the keywords and you'll find the program there. I hope to see some of you as students next year. I guess the main lesson that I taught at Superstars last year that I've been talking about is because everything's in flux, you want to have multiple income streams. You want to have a safety net isn't made of one strand. That's called a tightrope. I'm going to remember that. I like that.
That is a good one. It's a good thing we recorded this.
Yes, good. So that's one thing that I have learned is you try different things. And something works one year, something else works the next year. And the coolest part, and including this part, just talking to you, is it's not a boring job. I really like doing this stuff. This is a lot of fun.
Awesome. And it is always a pleasure to chat with you, Kevin. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark, and everybody.